Sweet. Cool. Hey, everybody. Thanks for coming tonight. My name is Gary Hamill. I'm a developer here at tECHO Technology Solutions. And tonight we're going to be talking about Salesforce Triggers. Before we get too into it, can I just get a show of hands of anybody that's actually used Salesforce before? Awesome. So most people in the crowd. That's great. How about anybody that's actually like opened up the developer console before? Nice. All right, cool. So let's talk about the business need that we're actually trying to address here. The problem is that for a lot of organizations today that use Salesforce, there's no simple, straightforward way of assessing the amount of activity that's taking place on contact records that they store in Salesforce. And what I mean by activity is the amount of emails that are being sent to contacts at different businesses, the amount of calls that are being logged, or the amount of meetings that are happening between individuals. There's no, with existing Salesforce configuration, without doing any customization, there's no just out of the box, like clear indicator of that type of activity that's taking place. For anybody that's used Salesforce before, you know that generally you have to access a contact record, scroll all the way down to the bottom, probably manually try and count up the activities here in this related list at the bottom, or even click into this list here and see how many activities there are. There's no number that tells you anything. You might have to export it to Excel. It's just really inefficient. So the problem we're trying to solve with the trigger that we're going to be building tonight is to provide whoever's viewing in contact just a clear indicator of how much activity has been taking place. So the way we're going to do that is by adding a custom field to these contact records and then writing a trigger that every time a task is created on a contact record, either inserted or updated or deleted, it'll populate the count of all the activities on this field so that a Salesforce user can just quickly access a contact and assess the amount of activity that's been taking place. And likewise, it can be used in reports too. So for example, you might run a report that's something like all of the contacts that have been created in the last 3 months that only have fewer than 5 activities logged, because that would be just a great indicator of maybe we haven't been cultivating these high net worth accounts as much as we should be, or these high net worth donors, right? Likewise, it would be a good indicator of potentially accounts that you guys have been reaching out to too much and potentially bothering, right? So why do we need to do a trigger for this? Unfortunately, something like this does not come with out-of-the-box functionality within Salesforce. For anybody that has experience with Salesforce, you might be thinking, why not use like a workflow rule or a roll-up field? And unfortunately, there are limitations to this functionality, right? So roll-up fields only work on master detail relationships. The relationships with tasks to their parent records are all lookup relationships, so that won't work. And workflows don't allow you to run on delete operations, for example. So in our use case, when a task is deleted, let's say somebody logged a call to the wrong contact, right? A workflow wouldn't be applicable because that it doesn't execute on a delete operation, right? So we need the activity count to update when somebody deletes an activity. Likewise, workflow rules don't allow you to access related records. So you could imagine a workflow firing when a task is updated, but you don't actually have access to the related contact record to update anything there. And you don't have access to the other activities on that contact record to actually count the number of activities. So this is why a trigger comes into place. So what is a trigger? A trigger, for those of you guys that are familiar with workflows, is very similar in concept. It's basically a set of actions that takes place when a certain event happens, right? So in our scenario, we want a trigger to fire when an activity, like a task, is logged on a contact record. When somebody logs an email on a contact record, we want this trigger to run so that it can count the number of activities on that record and update this field, right? In addition to that, triggers are just great because you can do all sorts of customizations with them. Since it essentially is just code, you can access all sorts of related records. You can send emails through triggers. You can tap into different APIs. And you can really just, customize it to your heart's desire. Essentially, there's no limitations. So that said, let's just jump right into it. So what I'm going to be doing here is walking you guys through the developer console. But before we do that, the first step is to create the custom field, right? We need like a place where this information is going to be stored on the contact record. So we're already on a contact. I'm going to use this quick access toolbar over here and just click View Fields. I'm going to scroll down to the New section and just click New. We'll make this field a number. Click next. We'll label this activity count. If you guys want, you can throw a default value of 0 in there. We can make this visible to all profiles for now. Click next. Yeah. Is that better? Sweet. And then we'll just hit save. So now if we were to go back to our contact record, we can see that there's a field here, activity count, and this is where we're going to be pushing the information. So now that we have the field, if you guys could go up to your name up in the top right corner and click this developer console button. If it's your first time, you'll get a prompt like that, so just hit no thanks. And what we're going to do is click File, New, Apex Trigger. We'll name this Update Activity Count. And now we just need to select the object that's actually going to fire this trigger. So we want this to run anytime a task is inserted, updated, or deleted, right? So we're just going to select the task object here. And you guys can see that we're basically provided the shell of a trigger here. The code that's pre-written is trigger update activity count, which is just the name we provided, on a task, which is the type of object. And then we're given some operations here. So basically, just like a workflow rule, you can define what events take place that will cause the trigger. So we want this trigger to fire. We're going to delete this and just type after insert, after update, and after delete. These are the 3 events that we want to fire this trigger, right? If a task is inserted, we want it to increment the count. If a task is updated from in progress to completed, we want it to increment the count. And if a task is deleted, then we want it to decrement the count. So there are a series of steps that I'm going to take you guys through. As I'm going through it, I'll just add in comments in here as designated by like the /. It's generally best practice as you're going through some code to leave some comments so that if anybody else is reviewing them, they kind of understand what's going on. So we'll just start right with step 1. So the first step is to set the list of tasks. Basically, when a trigger is fired, you're provided access to the records that actually fire that trigger. So for example, if a task is inserted, you're given that task in your trigger and you have access to all the fields on that task, all the information related to that task. The key here though is we need to understand if the trigger is being run based off of a delete operation versus an insert or an update operation. So let's just start coding this out a little bit and I'll explain it a little bit further in just a moment. So we're going to type task, open bracket, close bracket. This is basically telling the system that we're about to define a variable, which is just a list of tasks. Task is the object. Open bracket, close bracket is saying that this is going to be a list, like a set of objects or set of records, right? We're just going to call it tasks so that we can reference this variable later on in our code. And we're going to set this equal to new task. So that line of code is basically just establishing a blank, empty list of task records. There's nothing in it yet, but we're obviously going to fill it in. So like I said, we need to determine whether this is a delete operation versus an insert operation. So when a trigger fires, you're given access to different information. You're given access to the state of the records before the event fired and the state of the records after the event fired. So if it's an update operation, right, like if we change a task from in progress to completed, you can access that value in progress and you can access the value completed, and that way you can do comparisons. Like you can check what the state of the record was beforehand and what it is afterwards. So we need to figure out what type of operation this is. So we're going to type if trigger dot is delete tasks equals trigger dot old. Else tasks equals trigger dot new. So it's kind of clear from the code, right? Like if the trigger is a delete operation, give us the old state, right? Because we don't want the new state because there's actually no records there, right? They're deleted, they're gone. Otherwise, give us the new state of the records, meaning if it's anything but a delete operation, like an insert or an update, then give us the new state so we can access all the fields. So that's the first step. The second step, so again, this trigger is being fired from task objects, but we want to make sure we're updating the contacts on those tasks, right? Because that's where the field lies, like the aggregate number of tasks, right? So from the set of tasks that's firing this trigger, we want to get the related contact IDs. So that's our second step. Get related contact IDs. So we're going to define another blank list here, except instead of it being a task list this time, it's going to be a list of IDs. And we're going to call it contact IDs. And we're just, again, going to set this to an empty list of IDs. So now that we have the list of tasks, again, those tasks come with information, right? Those tasks are related to a contact record. So they can tell us which contact record they're related to. So we're basically just going to iterate through this list of tasks by saying for task in tasks, contact IDs.add task.who ID. So what are we doing here? So basically, every task comes with the ID of the object that it's related to. In this case, that field is called the who ID. It's not just called the contact ID because a task could be related to a lead as well. But this is meant to indicate this is like the person type of record that it's related to. So the task comes with that information. And you guys can see that, again, we defined this list of empty IDs right here. And so for every task that we got from the trigger, we're just going to add in the who ID or the contact ID into this list of IDs here. All right. Everybody still on board here? Nice. All right, so that's step 2. On to step 3. We're going to get all the actual contact records now. So whereas in step 2, we just determined a list of IDs, step 3 is actually going to give us those contact records because the task doesn't actually have the contact record, like the full contact record associated with it. It only has the ID that it's related to. But we can basically query the database using those IDs to actually get the contact records. And then from there, we can pull other information from those records. So step 3 is just get all contacts. And this one gets a little bit trickier. So bear with me for a moment and I'll kind of explain everything as I'm going through it. But instead of creating a list, again, of all the contacts, we're going to create what's called a map. So we'll call up, we're going to, tell the system we're creating a new map of IDs and contacts. We'll name this all contacts and say that equals new map ID contact. And we'll stop there for a second. So again, just like we were defining kind of blank lists up here, now we're creating a blank map. And I'll kind of show you guys visually what that looks like. If I go back to our slides. So I laid out some steps here. I kind of breezed through step 1 and step 2, but as you guys can see, a list kind of looks like this. It's just a list of objects. These are what Salesforce IDs look like. So this is what our list of contact IDs looks like, right? And these values can be accessed if you have the position, the relative position within the list. But a map, in order to access the value, you need to have a key instead, right? It's not an index-based set. So we can access this contact record, Gary Hamill, as long as we have this key that we can pass into the map. So that's what we're building right now. And what we're going to do here is basically, instead of just creating an empty map, actually fill it in with a query to the database. So we'll type in select ID activity count C from contact where ID in contact IDs. So what we're doing here with this query is asking basically Salesforce, the computer, to access our database of contact information. We're only going to select those contacts where the ID of the contact is in our list that we created up here, right? This contact IDs list is a list of Salesforce record IDs. So we're only going to pull contacts from the contact database where the IDs match that list. And basically, we're asking that with those contact records, they provide us some information. And we're requesting specifically the ID fields and the activity count field, which is the custom one that we created prior to jumping into the dev console. So that's step 3. Step 4. It's going to get a little bit more complicated, but I'll walk you guys through it, so don't worry. Basically, now we're at the point where we can determine the actual counts for each contact that we've got, the actual number of activities that are on those contacts. So this step is really important. So let's check it out. So this one is get count of completed tasks by contact ID. So we're going to define another list here, right? But instead of using the contact object or the ID or the task object, it's going to be called what's called an aggregate result. A little bit different, but it's defined in the same exact manner as any other list that we created. So aggregate result is another Salesforce object. These brackets designate that this is going to be a list of them, and we'll call this counts. And again, we're just going to set this equal to a query. So instead of creating a blank one and kind of filling it in later, we'll just query the database at the same time that we're creating this variable and just pass in information right away. So we're going to say select. This one is a little bit more tricky, so I'll kind of just type it out and then walk you guys through exactly what it means again. Count ID, activity count, who ID from task, where status, whoops. Equals completed, and who ID in contact IDs group by who ID. So again, as you guys may have been able to glean from the code, we're accessing the task database again this time. We're only pulling tasks from the database that have a status of completed because we only want to actually count those tasks that are completed on our records. We're only pulling the tasks where their who ID, remember in this case that's equivalent to contact ID, is actually in our list of contact IDs up here. And then we're basically grouping them all by contact ID. And that way we can just count the number of tasks in each of those groups. So you can imagine like importing 100 different tasks that are related to 10 different contacts, right? This is basically saying, okay, for each of those contacts, group all the tasks together and just give me the count for each one of those contacts. And that's what we're getting here by saying select count of ID. We're just counting each of those aggregate records. All right, only a couple more steps. So now that we actually have the count values and we know the who IDs that they're associated with, we need to just iterate through those counts and just apply them to the correct contact records and then update those contacts. Say again? Yes, good call. All right, cool. Before we do that, thanks, Kelsey. Step 5. We're going to create an empty list of contacts. This step is super simple. So we have the counts, right? But we need to have a list of contacts that we're going to be updating. So the idea here is we're going to just create an empty list. And then as we iterate through each of those count objects, we'll push in the contacts that we're actually updating. So again, contact, open bracket, close bracket, designating that we're just going to be creating a list of contacts. We'll call this contacts to update equals new contact. That's step 5. All right, now step 6. This time, like I said, we're going to be iterating through each contact count and apply it to the related contact. All right, so much like we kind of iterated through our list of tasks before, we're going to set up another for loop and iterate through each of these aggregate result objects. So we're going to say for aggregate result count in counts. So we're basically saying, iterate through this list of aggregate results objects we have here. And then for each count, we're going to determine the right contact record. We're going to update that contact record, and then we're going to add it to this list of contacts to update. So we're going to set a couple variables right off the bat. We'll set an ID variable. So we're on, like, let's imagine you're on the very first count, right, that this query returned. We're saying, all right, give us the associated who ID with that count, which again is just a contact ID, right? And we're going to say integer. And now we also just need to get the count, like the actual number that's associated with that aggregate result. So we'll call this activity count, integer count dot, get. And the reason we can just say dot get activity count up here is because we defined that as the name of this kind of count result that this query returns. So now we have the actual contact ID related to account. We have the actual count itself. So now the remaining steps within step 6 are to just update the associated contact record. So now we need to actually get the right contact record. So again, by defining contact right here, we're saying, you know, this variable is going to be a contact object, an instance of the contact object. We'll say all contacts.get contact ID. So this is where the kind of key value pair within that map comes into place. So we have this contact ID, right? And we have this map of IDs and contacts here. So this is where we're actually requesting from that map the value that's related to this ID. So again, if you guys kind of remember what that map looks like, it's an ID and then a contact record. So we're saying we have a contact ID, now give me the actual contact record that's associated with that ID. So now that we have the contact record, we can finally update it. So let's say contact.activity count, activity count C equals activity count. So by saying contact.activity count C, this is the custom field that we created before. We have this contact record. We're just saying access this field and then push in this value, which is kind of the count that we created before. And then finally, like I mentioned before, we're just going to shovel this contact record that's been updated into our empty list of contacts that needs to be updated. So we'll say contacts to update dot add contact. For any of you guys that are following along, it's always good to save as you're going through it. You guys can see that I have a little error here. Let's see what's going on. Duplicate variable count. Here's all count and counts. Say again? Yes, I forgot an S here. For those of you that are new to coding, syntax and getting variable names right is always kind of an issue. Thank you, Alan, for spotting that. Okay. So like I said, on line 38 here, we have the contact record. We updated the actual field here, and then we're just pushing it into this list of contacts. And then finally, and again, since this is a for loop, it's going to iterate through each of those counts, update the contact, and then push it into this list. So by the end of step 6, we've got basically a list of actual contact records with updated field values that we can tell Salesforce to actually update for real now. And that is the final step, the simplest one, which is great. So now we'll just say update related contacts. And all you have to type here is update contacts to update. And that's it. So if you guys want to see this in action, again, just click save, make sure nothing's wrong. And what this is basically doing here, this is an operation. This is telling the system, hey, we have all these actual instances of an object. They've got updated field values. Now actually push that and like save those records, right? So now if we go back to Salesforce, here we go. So again, you can see that there's just a whole bunch of activities on this record, Gary Hamill. There was nothing in activity count prior to this, but now if we log a call and just hit save, you guys can see that the activity count changes to 8. Likewise, if we were to delete a call, it goes back to 7. And if we were to, create a new task that's in progress and then change it to completed, it would update as well. That's pretty much it. As you guys can see now, for anybody that's using Salesforce, somebody could quickly just navigate to this Gary Hamel record, look down and see, oh, this person has, only received 7 outreaches. Maybe he's like $100 million potential donor. So I should reach out to him a little bit more. Or again, you can report on them and put together different reports like who haven't we reached out to that much over the last few months, right? So it's just a really easy, clear indicator of the amount of activity that's taking place and how many times you guys have been reaching out to different contacts within your organization. And that's it. Any questions? Or feel free to clap too, that works.